So you might have been thinking about tapestry for quite a while, but just don't know where to start. And it can feel really overwhelming. So I just want to give you a quick guide as to what you will need to start your journey. So you'll want a loom, and I'm going to show you the various options. And I also show you how to make a frame loom using a art canvas. You just strip the canvas off, and on a video I show you how to warp it and get it set at 8 warps an inch, which is my favourite set. And we can go into that a bit more in detail as well about what set means. But what you're going to need is a loom, some sharp scissors, just some small ones. These are just from Amazon. A 6-inch tapestry needle, and that's really useful on this small scale work. A couple of blunt tapestry needles, again from Amazon. A kitchen fork, which is great as a beater. And I also have to hand just a pink Sharpie, because sometimes we might draw on the warps, and I don't want the Sharpie marks to show through the thread, which can sometimes happen. And I also like to have some slim masking tape and my ruler. And what we're also going to need is warp. Now, I mentioned 2 warps on my classes. We have either the George Vale warp, which is great and perfect for when you're just practicing. It's a little bit cheaper than other warps. Or my preferred when I'm doing professional tapestries to sell is the Weaver's Bazaar warp, and that's called an 18s warp. And that's for when we're working at 8 warps in an inch, which we can get again into more detail about because it does get quite technical. And that one is 12/9 warp. And it tells you on the website that it's at 8 EPI, so that means 8 ends per inch. And then the looms we have that I work from that you'll see in my classes, that's a Saffron by Mirrix, which has been discontinued, but you can probably get one secondhand. They are great. So just a bit lighter than the new Chloe that was made to replace them. They're definitely a little bit heavier, but also that means they're a bit sturdier. And they come in a 5-inch or an 8-inch. And I know I don't want to spend a lot of money. So here is my frame loom that I've made. And I stripped off the canvas, made sure I took out all the staples, and then put on an adhesive measuring tape, again just from Amazon, and put on some warp, and it just helps you space the warps out. And I show you how to do all that, and then how to get it all ready to start working on. So say you don't need to spend much money, and when you're working initially at 8 warps per inch, all you need is 1 strand of double knitting yarn, or that could be 8-ply yarn, depending where you are in the world. So that's perfect because we all have a stash of that, or we can get it anywhere. It's lovely and cheap, and that will go a very long way. And you'll see when I do my beginners online course, we finish with this piece. And it's a really clever way of kind of looking like you're colour blending, but just by using some hatching techniques. And I show you how to do, so there's hatching there, and I show you how to do some steeper inclines and some more shallow ones, and steeper yet again, and a semicircle. And once you've mastered shapes, understanding kind of how to build a tapestry, then that's the great foundation. But I'm going to show you next how to warp your loom. So I'm going to show you how to warp my Mirrix loom, which I love to use. And if you get one, I know it is an investment, but they are fantastic looms. And I have to say, I'm not affiliated with Mirrix in any way. I just love them, and I discovered them a few years ago. And yeah, they're perfect. And if you decide you'd no longer like tapestry, you can sell them second hand really well. So just to bear that in mind. But I've got my warp. So this is the George Vale one, and it's a 12/9. And what I do is I place it on the floor in a bucket, I also have like a little a spinny holder that I use when I'm at home. And what I do is I leave quite a long tail, and then we're going to do a slip knot. So how I do that is just do a circle, get my index finger and pull it through. And we're going to put that slip knot onto one of the comb's teeth. And we're going to just put it on one, doesn't matter which one, just for the purpose of this video. And then I pull the slip knot nice and tight, but I do need to check where I've come on. So I've left 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I'm going to come up onto this one. And what you're going to do is you're just going to keep a nice tension, but not too tight. Because if you warp at the same tension, what we can do is then just tighten these bolts some more afterwards. And how I do it is, so I've just got the camera right in front of me, but I put my index finger on as I bring it down, always using my index finger just to stop the warp from popping off the loom, and that really helps. And you get into quite a nice momentum as you're going. So just keep going for whatever width you want. And I just feel the tension. I can tell from my fingers I'm just keeping a nice even tension. So just keeping going. And you do get quicker, and sometimes it might just pop off the prongs, but don't worry about that. It's just practice and you will get quicker. Now I have made that look really easy, and I'm just coming to the last line. So what I do is I get my scissors and I'm going to cut off my warp, leave quite a long piece of warp. So I've left quite a bit. And how I do it and how I've learned to do it, rather than wrapping it round the base, is I form another little slip knot, quite a loose one. If this works first time, that'll be amazing. And I just pull it down, stretch it down until it goes over the loop. And I'm just holding the tension still in this hand, and I pull it down, keeping that tension on, and then just pull it tight, like so. Now I've made that look very easy. That takes practice. And then what we're going to do is, and what I do is I either tear or cut 2 little pieces of this masking tape, which is why I have it to hand. Just tearing it off is fine. And what I do is I get this long tail, and rather than coming to this side of the tooth of the comb, I come inwards, and it keeps the warp nice and straight. I wrap it round a few times, and then I just tape that warp in place. And I do the same at this side. I don't wrap it round at this side of the tooth. I come in and I wrap around like so, and then tape it into place. And we have a lovely firm warp. It should have a little bit of spring in it, but not too much. And the next thing I'm going to do is show you how I do a little tiny row of double half hitch knots, and that forms as the base of the weaving. So as you can see here, and these knots stop the work from sliding down the warps as you're working. And it's my preferred little border on most of my pieces. So I'm just going to show you how to do that next. So I've zoomed you in nice and close. So we're going to get the same warp. And what we're going to do for the double half hitch knots is we're going to take 6 times the width of the warps we've put on as your length of warp that we're going to cut off. So just very approximate. I always allow a little bit more. So just very roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and cut. So the first one of the double half hitch knots is the trickiest one. So we're going to take the first warp, pull it slightly forward with your non-dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so take this warp, and we're going to keep this extra warp in my right hand in front of these warps. We're never going to go behind, and that's a good way of thinking about it. So we're going to pull it forward and just watch this nice and slow. So making a loop like a C shape, coming around the back of that warp and pull the tail through. So I have the shorter side in my left hand. Do exactly the same again. Make a C shape, come around the back of that warp and pull the large tail through. And then when you're in position, pull that tight and you'll get a lovely little line. And we're going to do the same again. Pull the next warp through, forward, sorry. Make the C shape, come around the back and underneath. So around the back and under, that's the important part. Bring that down into position. Pull that again, forward. Make the C shape, come around the back. And don't pull it tight until you've got it exactly into position, or else you'll end up with a very, very baggy double half hitch knot. Now again, I've got the camera right in front of me, so it's slightly harder, but I just want to make sure you see this nice and close up. So just getting into a pattern, and where you pull it tight when it's right down in position. So it's not my neatest because I've got to say that I've got my camera right in front of my face. So a C shape, around, under. It's like a pigtail when you're doing tapestry. Pull it down into place. Same walk forward, circle, round, and pull into position. See, they're starting to get neater as we go. So pull up forward, C shape, around, behind the warp, into position, pull forward, around, into position and tighten. And that makes a lovely little diagonal and quite a secure knot. As you start weaving, they will slide down the warps a tiny bit, and you can just get your fork and just push them, or your fingers, push them back into position. But I just think it makes a lovely, neat little border. And if you're working on a bigger scale, you would do a slightly different border. This wouldn't be sufficient for a heavy piece of work. But we're just working on a very small scale. So this is perfectly adequate. And I've been doing this for quite some time now. And it just looks really lovely. And I like the fact it is warp coloured as well. So I'm just going to keep going and I'll see you back at the end. So I've gone all the way to the end and I've left a tail here because we're going to sew those in at the back of the work when your work comes off the loom. And this one, so it's got quite a long tail left. So I just trim it off and leave them both hanging down. And next I am going to show you just how to get started. So the best thing to do is just to grab some double knitting yarn. And what I do is I just cut off about an arm's width worth of wool. Doesn't have to be exact. And what we're going to do is get either one of your needles and thread it onto the needle and leave it like this. So I'm working very close up, just so you can see what I'm doing. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to show you how we start and how we maintain tension on the loom. And then you'll be able to just practice the absolute basics before you either decide to work from a book or maybe take one of my online lessons. There's lots of online classes out there, so whatever suits you and your taste. But just briefly, what we do here is, this is a loom that doesn't have a shedding device on. So sometimes you'll see a loom that has a shedding device that you can pull a lever forward or use various different little tools and it'll bring the alternate threads forward. So here, without a shedding device, warps number 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 and so on is one shed. and then the even 2, 4, 6, 8 is your second shed. So shed is very, very important in weaving. So what we're going to do, and how I work, is I just start and I only weave to about 1 inch on the loom, because what I want to do is make sure that we look after these edges, and an edge in weaving is called a selvage. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start by going under the first one, then over, under, over, till we have about 5 warps facing forward on the needle. And then we pull the thread through, and then we're going to do what we call a pigtail. Now the pigtail is what locks the wool into place, and then the weight of the yarn will then sit on top, and it stops you having loose thread at the side. You do not want that, so this pigtail is very important. So we come around the front of the first warp and we tuck it in between warp number 1 and 2 warps, push it through, and it does look like a pigtail, and we pull all of it down into position. And what you want to do to get the right tension is create a lovely little curve or an arch, and then just push it down either with your fingers or with your fork or your tapestry beater. And by leaving the arch, you've created a nice bit of tension. You've got the little bubbled effect, which will then cover the warps as we work up the loom. So after I've done that first inch, I then continue, and you get quicker, but you see I do like a natural pushing rhythm as I go along. And what I show people to do in a class, in a workshop, is I create a big arch like that, push it down in the middle, then down and down, and then either use your fingers or your fork and just tap it down, and you've got that nice little bubble. It's that little sweet spot. And then we're going to do the opposite on the second row. So we're going to come around the back of that first warp and then over. So doing the exact opposite. And again, I do about 5 warps, so about 1 inch. I kind of sometimes get hold with my thumb and middle finger, kind of keep hold of that weft, make that little arch, then gently push it down. So you don't want this too loose. If you leave it too loose, what you're going to see is this. You're going to have it kind of like this, okay? So when you push it down, you've got a very baggy selvage. And you don't want to have that. If you do have that, you just pull up your weft, make that little arch, and then just pat it down. And it's all just practice. So what I haven't really made clear, again, is the official words. So this is your warp, and this is your weft or your yarn. So warp and weft. And then we're going to continue on with that lovely rhythm. See, I'm not left-handed, so it's not as quick on the non-dominant hand. So you make that lovely big arch, pat it down, and you can use this needle or your fingers and just keep going. And just, you can get a lovely neat edge just by taking a little bit of time and pat that down. So you've created that nice tension at the side, and it does get caught up in the teeth. That happens a lot. And then just continue all the way across. And then when you've done a few rows, and in tapestry, 1 row is called a pick, and 2 rows are called a pass. So we're on row 4 or pick 4, which means we've done 2 passes of work. And when you've done about 4 picks, you will start to see that the weft or your yarn is starting to pack down. Okay, and what you can do as well is get your fork and just push it down. If you push it down at this stage, you can't see your warp, and that's what you're aiming for. You don't want to be able to see your warp through the work, and if you can see it, then that's not quite right. You just probably need to put a bit more of an arch in as you go along, because then as it packs down, it will cover the warp. And I'm just going to show you what will happen if you pull too tight with your weft. So if I pulled too tight as I come in like this, I have too much tension, it's going to start to squeeze the warp in, and as you work up the loom, you're going to create this kind of hourglass shape. Now that's really common. I see it all the time in workshops, especially as you're working at the loom. We tend to be in a rush to finish, and we get tighter and tighter until it's doing this. So it's just remembering to do that first little arch. I find that really useful. And then just taking our time and putting the same amount of curve. So I normally say, I'm just going to undo that, about an inch or so. They say that's sweet spot. And if you're packing too much weft, that's another issue. So if we're going along, and I'll just show you, if we put too much weft in, so pack that down as normal. And how to put too much weft in is to do this. It would be to put too much of an arch in. So really big arch, that's too much. And if you pack that down, what's going to happen is, as you go along in your work, you'll start to have like a bobbled effect on your work. There'll be too much weft that's getting squeezed into this area, that your work will become wavy. Now, it's all practice, and there's always a reason why something's happening. But if you're looking to do a course, just spend time having a practice, just like this, just with some double knitting yarn, and just work on tension. Have a play. And then you'll be able to, the next thing to do is to progress onto shapes. And I'll just get my little sample, put that to one side. As you progress, what we will cover, if you decide to take one of my courses, is I'm just going to zoom you out if I can, or I'll move this further back. We're going to look at gradual angles, and that in itself can be quite clever. We're going to look at steep angles. We're going to look at curves. We're going to look at something called hatching. This is hatching, and I use this technique all the time in my work. We can have shapes, and these are interlocking shapes. Here's shapes that are just left open, so they're not interlocking. And then we can look at all sorts of shapes. I cover this one in my Artful Threads course. And then we also can move on, once you've done the beginner's course, you can move on to colour blending. And that's when it gets really exciting. And we learn to paint on the loom, which I will cover in another video. But most of all, have fun. You are going to make lots and lots of mistakes. That's absolutely normal. And I'm here. Send me a message, drop me an email if you have any questions. Even if you think they sound really stupid, they're honestly not. And I look forward to seeing what you do.